Okay, let's dive into a stack of documents that honestly tell a pretty wild story.
Yeah.
Imagine this. You've got a scientist, some technology making, well, frankly, almost unbelievable claims about predicting the future.
Uh-huh.
And it's all tangled up in the really intense geopolitical situation in Ukraine right now. That's what we're unpacking today.
It sounds like a layered scenario. The sources you shared seem to blend some highly technical stuff with personal fears and then this whole sweep of complex history, too.
Exactly. We've got a lot to cover.
Seems like it.
So this deep dive, it really centers on a Russian scientist, Vadim Chernoff. His software, it's called RALF1, and the just extraordinary predictive power it's claimed to have.
Right.
Plus his stated difficult circumstances right now in Ukraine and this pressing desire he has to relocate to Poland.
And the material itself is quite varied, isn't it? I saw technical descriptions, official registrations.
Yeah, personal letters asking for help, financial details, even historical analyses, and bits from a video statement.
So it gives a pretty full picture, I guess, but filtered through these specific documents.
Exactly. So our mission for you listening is to try and cut through all of it. We want to understand what RALF1 supposedly is, what its creators claim it can do.
Get a sense of who Vadim Chernoff is based just on these sources.
Right. And unpack his stated reasons for wanting out of Ukraine and see how his whole situation kind of intersects with the dynamics involving Poland, especially given, the strategic nature of this tech.
And you're right, some of the claims presented in these sources are genuinely surprising. We're talking advanced geophysics, claims bordering on quantum physics.
And a deeply personal story playing out against this very, very tense backdrop.
Yeah.
All right, let's start at the beginning then. Who is Vadim Chernoff, according to these documents? What's his background?
Okay, so the picture the sources paint is he's a Russian citizen, a scientist with a long career, something like 30 plus years.
Specifically in geophysics and also computer programming. He's got, solid academic credentials, MS and bachelor's from Moscow State University.
Okay.
In geological and geophysical sciences, focused on something called induced polarization methods.
So a really deep background in the science of probing the Earth, and he's recognized for this in Russia, professionally.
That's what it says. The documents note he got a personal diploma from the Minister of Natural Resources back in 2010, which sounds like, a pretty significant nod for contributions to developing mineral resources in Russia.
Definitely.
Plus, he also has specific training in information protection from a place called Masscom in Moscow.
All right, so a credentialed, experienced scientist in a field that's, vital to Russia's economy. Now let's get to the core of the technology, RALF1.
Yeah.
What exactly is it? And what does it claim to do, at least, initially?
Okay, RALF1. It stands for Reflection on Actions of Lorentz Forces 1. It's described basically as a software package that Chernoff developed himself.
And it's not just some, obscure side project. It actually has a Russian patent number, registered way back in 2011.
Okay, so it's formally registered. And initially, its main purpose was quite specific.
Yeah, exactly. Its primary application, according to these sources, is processing geophysical data specifically to find hydrocarbon reserves, oil and gas.
Right. Standard, but important stuff.
Well, standard in goal, maybe not method. The documents link it to techniques like AFSIP-3D, that's anisotropic frequency sounding of induced polarization, and high-resolution time-frequency EM surveying.
Okay, complicated names.
Or specialized techniques, yeah. And the sources claim that major energy players like Rosneft and Gazprom have used sort of related approaches.
Ah, okay. So it builds on established, even if complex, methods used in the energy sector. What are the specific capabilities claimed for RALF1, though, when it comes to this kind of deep earth analysis?
It claims to analyze a whole range of parameters within geological layers, going down to depths of, over 10 kilometers.
10 kilometers, that's deep. Seriously deep. It looks at things like how resistant rocks are to electricity, how that resistance changes depending on direction anisotropy, and how they react to electromagnetic fields.
Okay.
It supposedly handles complex multi-layer formations and can process a huge amount of data, like over 100 parameters from just one measurement point.
Wow. And there's a claim about precision, too, right?
Yes, that's a key point in the documents.
Yeah.
They state approved accuracy of 2 meters.
2 liters.
Yeah, when calculating the saturation of hydrocarbons or highly saline water. If that holds up, it's remarkably precise for mapping what's underground.
Absolutely. And the application isn't just limited to typical oil fields, is it? I thought I saw something else.
No, you're right. The documents suggest much broader potential uses. They propose it could work for exploration in really tough geological spots like granite formations.
Granted. Okay.
And they even go so far as to suggest it could be used, potentially, on other planets. They specifically mention Mars.
Mars. For finding what?
For finding water or energy sources is quite a leap from Earth's subsurface. That's putting it mildly. Okay, so what kind of gear do you need to actually collect the data for this software? Is it standard stuff?
Doesn't sound standard. The sources talk about using powerful pulsed current generators, sometimes called MHD generators,
Right.
along with multi-channel digital stations to take the actual measurements. And this involves laying out long grounded electric lines, maybe up to 30 kilometers long, to run these surveys.
Okay, so it needs significant hardware in the field, a big operation. And at its core, the software uses this reflection on actions of Lorentz forces idea. How does that work, basically?
That's described as the mathematical heart of it. It's about taking the effects of Lorentz forces, the fundamental forces on moving charges in electromagnetic fields, and mathematically mapping those effects onto the physical properties of whatever you're measuring.
Be it rock or something else?
Or potentially something else entirely, yeah. Uses signal processing, some randomization techniques, and Fourier filtering to sort of extract that information.
Okay, all right. So far, it sounds like an incredibly sophisticated, maybe even cutting-edge tool for geophysical analysis.
Right.
But this is where the sources take a really extraordinary turn, isn't it?
Absolutely. This is the big one.
They claim RALF1 isn't just about mapping what is there, but predicting what will be there or what might happen.
This is definitely the most, let's say, audacious claim in these documents.
Right.
They actually draw a parallel between the RALF1 algorithm and a concept straight out of quantum physics.
Which is?
The observer effect. They specifically mention Thomas Young's famous double-slit experiment.
Ah, the one where just looking at particles changes how they behave? That one.
That's the one. The sources propose that RALF1's mathematical process can somehow perform the function of an observer in a similar way.
Okay.
And they claim this observer function allows the software to predict upcoming events. That's the phrase used. In complex, unpredictable systems, they call them open systems.
And it does this without needing traditional simulations.
That's the claim, without simulations.
Why bypass simulations? What's their reasoning there?
The argument presented is that traditional simulations are sort of inherently limited by the scientific models and assumptions they're built on.
Okay.
The sources call these established scientific stereotypes. They argue that RALF1's observer method somehow gets around these limits, offering a more direct line to future possibilities.
Right. And the list of things they claim this observer function can predict is, well, it's vast.
It really is. Beyond just geological stuff, it's claimed to predict fluctuations in things like cryptocurrencies
Curious.
and oil prices. They make a very specific, pretty striking claim about predicting the 2019 drone attack on the Saudi oil facilities,
Whoa.
describing that attack as a black swan event.
A black swan that's famously unpredictable, right? Something rare, high impact, only really makes sense after it happens.
Exactly. So claiming to predict one before it happens is a massive claim.
What else on the prediction list?
They don't stop there. The claimed areas include meteorological events,
Yeah.
basically, biological processes like cell growth, and even global threats, meteorites, earthquakes, floods, epidemics, wars, crime.
Wars. Okay, that's huge. And here's a surprising detail I saw in the sources. They claim this predictive capability, maybe in some limited way, actually got some recognition in Ukraine itself.
Yeah, that was interesting. The documents mention an open letter that recognized Chernoff's work as useful. And this was apparently at the level of Ukraine's National Security and Defense Council.
Useful for what, specifically?
The context given is its potential for predicting the intensity and the locations of bombings based on analyzing historical data.
Huh. Okay, so let's just recap this part. We have a seasoned scientist, deep geophysical background, who's developed software that, according to these sources, goes from incredibly precise underground mapping
Right, the 2-meter accuracy claim.
to predicting global events across completely different fields. Cryptocurrencies, wars, black swans.
All through a claimed connection to quantum observer principles.
It's a lot to take in. Now, let's pivot to Vadim Chernoff's current reality, as these documents describe it. What's his situation right now? Where is he?
The sources indicate he's currently in Ukraine, but his professional activities, his ability to actually do his work there, have been significantly restricted. And this has been going on since 2014.
Since 2014? Okay. And he expresses a pretty strong level of distrust towards Ukrainian authorities and intermediaries.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
He explicitly states he cannot trust them. He cites years of what he describes as maltreatment and hostility. This sort of profound distrust seems really central to his situation, according to these papers.
And there's a stated fear for his safety, too, physical safety.
Yes, he states he faces an imminent risk. That's the phrase used, a deportation back to Russia.
And in the context of the sources, that deportation isn't just inconvenient, it's dangerous for him.
It's framed as potentially leading to persecution in Russia for treason. That's a specific fear mentioned.
Wow. The documents also present his personal view on Ukrainians, which is, well, it's quite stark and connected to historical events.
Yes, it's very direct. They explicitly state he views all Ukrainians as enemies and holds an anti-Ukrainian stance.
Okay.
And to help explain this perspective, the sources make a very specific historical reference, Prague, 1968.
Prague, 1968, that's the suppression of the Prague Spring, right? How do the sources connect that event and maybe broader history to Chernov's stated views? And just to be absolutely clear here, for you listening, as we go through this, we are simply reporting the perspectives and claims found within these source documents. We're not endorsing them ourselves.
Absolutely. Understood. So the sources reference the 1968 invasion of Czechoslovakia by the Soviet Union and other Warsaw Pact forces.
Right.
The specific claim presented in this material is that Ukrainians were key players both in the decision-making and in the actual execution of that invasion. They cite Ukrainian natives who were in powerful Soviet leadership roles back then. Names like Brezhnev, Podgorny, Grechko are mentioned. And they also claim that Ukrainian troops formed the main force of the invading army. Again, that is the specific historical interpretation presented in these sources.
Okay. And this interpretation, according to the sources, ties into a deeper, longer history of tension between, say, Poland and Ukraine.
Yes, the sources touch on that too. They mention centuries of historical animosity, things like socioeconomic divisions back when Poland ruled parts of Ukraine, Cossack uprisings,
Right.
and particularly violence between Polish and Ukrainian groups in the 20th century. They mention actions attributed to nationalist groups like Unia Upa, and specifically events like the Volhynia massacres targeting Polish civilians.
Difficult history.
Very. And they note the differing historical narratives that exist, for example, around figures like Stepan Bandera. Although one source does add a counterpoint that thousands of Ukrainians actually fought with the Polish army in World War II.
So the sources present this specific take on Prague 1968 alongside this broader, complicated history of tension as factors contributing to Chernov's stated view of Ukrainians as enemies and his deep distrust of the system he's in.
That's how the documents seem to frame his perspective, yeah. It's presented as the basis for why he feels he's been in a hostile and dangerous environment in Ukraine since 2014.
Okay. Now, beyond the personal risk and these views, he also has significant business interests in Ukraine, doesn't he?
Yes, that's another layer. He owns a company called Ukrainoft Invest LLC,
Okay.
and it's involved in oil recovery operations within Ukraine. The sources also mention property records listing other companies like TV KPO Grant and Tuvi Compass Plasnafta Ukraina. These seem to be linked to his business network focused on energy.
And how do these business ties and property ownership factor into his current difficult situation, according to the sources? Does it help or hurt?
It's presented as a bit of a double-edged sword. On one hand, owning property and having a business in Kyiv solidifies his economic ties there. But the document suggests it also significantly increases scrutiny from the SBU Ukraine's security service.
Why?
Especially given his stated anti-Ukrainian stance and, of course, the potential strategic value of his RALF-1 technology. So while these assets might potentially help build a case for residency somewhere else, like Poland,
Right.
they also run the risk of being seized by Ukrainian authorities.
So he's really in a complex spot, professionally stifled, feels personally threatened with deportation, deeply distrustful of the system he's in.
All while having business interests that are both an anchor and maybe a liability.
Yeah. So what is his stated goal now, and what steps is he taking based on these documents?
His goal seems crystal clear from the sources.
Mm-hmm.
He is urgently seeking help to facilitate his transfer out of Ukraine and into Poland.
Urgently.
He describes his situation as critical because of the professional restrictions and this deportation risk he perceives.
And the sources mention him reaching out for help, trying different avenues.
Yes, they mention an attempt to contact the Belarusian embassy in Kyiv, apparently seeking their help to mediate somehow.
Belarus. Okay.
But the sources point out the huge logistical challenge of even accessing the embassy, plus the inherent risks involved in that kind of move, especially given who he is and the technology involved.
Right. Makes sense. And if he does successfully get to Poland, What's his plan there, according to these documents?
His stated plan is to apply for residency in Poland. He wants to do this through his existing company, Chernoff Invest.
Ah, use the company structure.
Seems like it. And then continue his scientific work and professional contributions from Poland. He also apparently sent a letter to Amnesty International Spain trying to get support from an NGO.
Okay. This brings us right to the Poland connection and maybe touches on that focus question we mentioned earlier. Given RALF1's truly remarkable claims, including predicting military events, wars, one might logically wonder, is his motivation for moving to Poland specifically to offer this technology for Poland's defense, especially given the regional situation?
It's a very logical question to ask, absolutely. And yes, RALF1 does claim this general capability, right? Predicting military upcoming events and wars. So applying that to protect Poland would, theoretically, fit within its claimed functions.
But what do the sources actually say is his explicit motivation? Why does he say he wants to go to Poland?
And this is really a crucial point based strictly on the material we have in front of us. The sources do not explicitly state that Chernoff's primary reason, his main motivation, for seeking transfer to Poland is to help with Poland's defense using RALF1.
Okay, that's important. The sources don't say that's his reason. So if that's not the stated reason in the sources, what is the Polish advantage that the documents talk about, and how does that align with his motivation?
Right, so the sources frame this potential Polish advantage mainly through an economic lens, not military.
Big economic, how so?
They suggest that RALF1's significant applications in the energy sector remember the oil and gas finding capabilities.
Yeah, the core function initially.
Exactly. That, combined with Chernoff's existing business structure, Chernoff Invest, and his assets, aligns well with Poland's economic priorities.
Ah, okay, so energy, not defense.
That's presented as the key value Poland might see in hosting him and his technology, which in turn could significantly help his case for getting Polish residency. It seems to be about leveraging the economic potential, especially in energy, to enable his move and let him continue his work somewhere he feels safe.
So the sources suggest Poland's potential interest and his own pathway to residency is much more likely tied to the energy side of RALF1 and his business,
rather than its claimed military prediction function. That's the connection the documents emphasize when they discuss why Poland might be a viable option for him and what value he brings to the table. His stated reasons remain personal safety and professional continuity, enabled by this potential economic alignment.
Got it. And there's also a significant practical warning mention about his stated political views, right?
Yes, the sources explicitly stress this. His stated anti-Ukrainian views must be essentially kept under wraps, hidden or very carefully managed.
Why is that so critical?
Because revealing them publicly could create major propaganda headaches, potentially alienate key allies for Poland, and basically undermine his whole effort to gain residency there.
Yeah.
It's a significant risk factor.
Okay, so let's try to pull this all together based only on what's in these provided sources. We have a Russian scientist, deep background in geophysics,
Right.
claiming to have developed technology that can not only map the Earth with apparently incredible precision,
But also predict future events, even black swans, all based on a mechanism described using quantum observer principles.
and he finds himself in a really precarious personal situation in Ukraine, feeling professionally restricted, fearing deportation, fueled by these stated historical interpretations he holds, and a really profound distrust of the system around him. And he's urgently seeking to get to Poland. But, crucially, the sources suggest his motivation isn't explicitly to offer military prediction services.
No, it appears driven much more by the need for personal safety and the desire to just continue his scientific work through his company.
Leveraging the energy applications of his technology as a potential way to align with Poland's economic interests and secure that move.
Exactly. This deep dive is fascinating precisely because it's built entirely from the ground up using just these specific documents you provided. It's like a snapshot of a really complex reality, but filtered through the claims, the perspectives, the fears contained within those pages.
It really makes you pause and think, doesn't it? What are the implications when potentially world-altering technology, if these claims are even partially true, becomes so deeply tangled up with the personal fears, the historical perspectives, the complex geopolitical mess surrounding its creator?
Yeah, and how do countries even navigate these situations? How do they weigh that perceived technological advantage against all these intricate layers of personal histories, political views, international relationships?
It's a powerful reminder, I think, of just how interconnected technology, individual lives, and these huge global dynamics really are.
Absolutely. Definitely something to mull over.
Indeed.